Welcome to the Adobe Encore authoring segment of our tutorial series. Before we dive into authoring our project, I would like to point out that we've included an Encore quick reference guide in our kit. If you just go into the Authoring Templates folder, in the Encore Menu Templates folder, you will see that there is an Encore quick reference guide. I'll just go ahead and open it up. Now, this written guide will provide step-by-step instructions on authoring your disk in Encore if you would prefer using that to watching this tutorial every time you forget one of the steps. This guide has been updated from a previous version to reflect our latest workflow. Alright, let's get on to authoring. Due to some limitations of Encore CS3, we have slightly different workflows for CS3 compared to CS4 and above. Since most people are now using CS4 and above, the main part of this tutorial will be focused on that workflow, and then at the end, we will go over the different steps taken for CS3. You want to start by creating a new project. I'm just going to name it Sample Project, and I want to create this in a new folder under my Project Working folder. So under my sample project folder, I'm going to create a new one and we'll call it Encore. Okay. Now you want to set your authoring mode for either Blu-ray or DVD. I'm just going to leave it at Blu-ray, but if you are creating a DVD, don't worry, the workflows are pretty much exactly the same. Go ahead and set your television standard to NTSC or PAL. Now the rest of the settings can be found in different locations depending on the version of Encore that you're using. In Encore CS 5.1, the rest of the settings are found in the default transcode settings. For Blu-ray, you want to make sure that your maximum audio-video bitrate is set to 20 megabits per second. The default is 15. Now for video transcoding, you want the codec to be set to MPEG-2. You want your dimensions set to 1920 by 1080. The default is 1440 by 1080. So go ahead and change that to 1920 by 1080. And your frame rate will either be 2997 if you are NTSC and 25 frames per second if you are doing PAL. Audio transcoding should be set to Dolby Digital. Now just a small note, these settings are just what your menus will be rendered at and not necessarily your main videos. You want your motion menus to be rendered as MPEG-2 and your main videos can be rendered in H.264. So don't worry if you want your main videos to be H.264. These are just the settings for the motion menus. And if you're authoring a DVD, you want your maximum audio video bitrate to be 8 megabits per second. And Dolby Digital, okay. If you're using Encore CS4, some of those settings might be found in an Advanced Settings tab. All right, now that you have all your settings configured correctly, just go ahead and click OK. For those of you not familiar with Adobe Encore, it's very similar to other Adobe applications. You have your project panel over here where you import your assets and create your timelines. Down here you have the view of your timeline. Over here you have a layers panel and some additional ones. And the upper right you have your properties panel, which will change with each asset that you select. And in the center you have your view of your menu. And there's also a monitor tab for watching back your timelines. Before we import any of our menus or assets, it's a good idea to clear the cache of Encore. So to do that, you just go to Edit, Preferences, Media, and then located down under Media Cache Database, you can just click Clean or Clean Database depending on your version. Okay. The next step is to import your assets and organize them. We want to create a folder to place our menu assets into, so let's just right-click, New Folder. And we'll call it Menu Assets, okay? And then we'll just select that folder, right-click, and go Import as Asset. Then in your Menu Exports folder, go ahead and select all of the assets for that particular format, and then Open. And remember, if you'll be having Encore generate your multiple pages of scene selection menus, you will only have a single scene menu. All right, now what we've imported are just menu backgrounds. They're not actual menus themselves. They don't have any buttons. What we need to do is import the menus themselves. So we'll just create a new folder and we'll call it menus. Okay. Now just go ahead and select that folder, right click, import as menu. Now what you want to do is go into the folder where you extracted your kit and go into the authoring templates folder, into the Encore menu templates folder, and then go into the folder which corresponds with the format that you are authoring. If you are authoring a standard definition PAL, you'll use the menus in that folder. If you're authoring a standard DVD NTSC, you will author using that folder. And if you are authoring a Blu-ray disc, either PAL or NTSC, you will use the menus from this folder. Since we are authoring a Blu-ray disc, we want to use the menus located in the HD menus folder. Go ahead and select all the menus that you'll be using in your project. If you chose not to use the special features menu or the scene selection menu, you would simply not import those into your project. Since we'll be demonstrating the use of all the menus, I will import all of them. And just as a reminder, this tutorial can be used with any of our ProMotion menu kits, as they are all designed to use the same workflow. We're going to select all of them and then open. Now by default, the main menu should have been configured as the first play, and you can see that by this little special play icon in the thumbnail. But if it's not set as the first play for some reason, you can just right click on the asset and click on set as first play located here. If you'd rather have something else set as your first play, such as a small intro animation or something before the main menu appears, you would just simply set that timeline as the first play. If you are authoring a Blu-ray disc and you are using the pop-up menu, you want to make sure that Encore recognizes that as a pop-up menu. So go ahead and select it. Then in the Properties panel under the Pop-up tab, make sure you check Set as Blu-ray Pop-up Menu. Alright, for those of you that have manually rendered out additional scene selection pages from After Effects using the scene selection drop zones, now is a good time to import those additional scene menu pages. So you just simply select the menu folder, import as menu, and just go ahead and select that menu file again and open. And if you have additional pages, you would simply repeat that until you've imported as many menus as you need. Now we want to import all the videos that you're going to be authoring to your disk. So let's create a new folder for those. Right click, new folder, and we'll call it videos. Okay. And we'll just select that folder, right click, import as asset. And now we'll just go into a folder that contains those videos. I went ahead and pre-encoded all my videos using the Adobe Media Encoder. It created a Dolby Digital AC3 file, which can be shared by both Blu-ray and DVD. I also encoded a standard definition MPEG-2 file and an HD H.264 file. So right now I'm going to select all the audio and video files for those. Since I'm authoring a Blu-ray disc right now, I will not be selecting the standard DVD videos. Then I'll just go ahead and open. What you want to do now is create a timeline for each one of those videos. If you have separate audio and video assets like I have here, you'd simply select the audio and video asset, right-click, new timeline, and do the same for the other assets, new timeline. You can also import Premiere sequences through Dynamic Link by going to File, Adobe Dynamic Link, import Premiere Pro sequence. But I've personally found that Encore functions much faster when you have it do as little as possible. In this case, I have already transcoded the audio and video assets before I imported them into the project. If you have Encore do your transcoding, it can automatically adjust the bitrate to maximize the quality while still fitting on the disk. But if you are familiar with bitrates and use a bitrate calculator, you can encode your videos before bringing them into Encore for a much faster authoring experience. After you create your timelines, now would be a good time to place chapter points throughout those. If you exported an MPEG-2 DVD file out of Premiere, it will automatically import those Encore chapter points when you import the file. Otherwise, you have to manually create them by selecting a point in the timeline and clicking the Add Chapter button. I'm just going to quickly go through and place those now. This is a short timeline. It does not need any chapters. Same with this one. And I'll just place these chapters now. Okay, there we go. After you've placed your chapter points, now would be a good time to save your project. So just go to File, Save. Let's just go ahead and close this. All right, you're done with your timelines for now. The next step is to set the motion backgrounds for your menus. If we open up our main menu by double-clicking on it, you can see that it just has a black background. It also has buttons that we've provided for you, but the background is currently black. And that is because we have not set the background of our menu to that of the background that we rendered out of After Effects. Let's go ahead and reveal all of our rendered menus. So with your main menu selected, go into the Property panel, and in the Motion tab, you want to set the video and audio assets to that of your rendered assets from After Effects. So for the video, we'll just drag the pick whip over to the main menu with intro, as well as the audio. Now you might be wondering why it's still displaying black after we just set it to the main menu. And the reason for that is that the beginning of the main menu starts with the intro sequence, and the first frame of the intro sequence is black. You're also seeing the point in the menu at which the button highlights become visible. Now, we don't want the button highlights visible during the intro sequence. We want them to appear after it has completed. So what we need to do is specify a loop point for the menu. Further down in the Properties panel, you will see there is an area to specify the loop point. We'll simply change that to 10 seconds. And as you can see, the display of our menu has been updated with the very beginning of the main menu instead of the very beginning of the intro sequence. This is also the point that the menu will loop back to after it has finished playing through. You do not need to specify the loop point for any of the other menus, as the transitions to and from those menus have separate assets. The pop-up menu does not have any motion background to it as it appears over your main video. So we'll move on to our scene menu. And we'll just drag the video asset to our scene menu 1. Move on to our second scene menu if you have rendered one out of After Effects. And for the special features menu. If you'll be having Encore render content into the scene selection boxes, and you want that content to be playing video instead of displaying a still image, then you need to check Animate Buttons for that menu. And if you'll be having Encore create multiple pages of scene selections automatically, then you just simply check this for the first page, and it will automatically apply that to every other page that it creates. However, if you want still images placed into those boxes, or if you have already rendered content into those boxes using the scene selection drop zones from the After Effects project, you would simply uncheck Animate Buttons. Alright, now that you've configured the backgrounds for all of your menus, the next step is to customize the colors of your Blu-ray pop-up menu if you have decided to change the colors from their default. So let's just double click on that pop-up menu to bring it up. As you can see, it's still using the default pink colors for the buttons, and the rows for this menu is left at its default color instead of the red that we changed it to. Of course, if you've replaced the rows with some other object in your After Effects project, you will need to replace it in the pop-up menu as well. So with the pop-up menu selected, go to Edit, Edit menu in Photoshop. Here is our pop-up menu in Photoshop. Let's quickly go over how pop-up menus are constructed for Adobe Encore. Let's go into our Layers panel. Now the way pop-up menus work is that all the elements of the menu must be placed into a button. You cannot have some element in the background that spans across multiple buttons, such as this strip across the bottom. And you also cannot have buttons overlap. What this means is that any elements you want to appear as if they are spanning across multiple buttons, you need to splice them up and place them into each of the button groups. For example, our main menu button here contains the text, the button highlight for that. It also contains the strip in the background for that button and the rows. So if you go into our main menu group, if you turn that off, you can see all the elements disappeared for that button. Now for each button, you can have multiple layers in the background, but all those elements must be contained inside of a single button which cannot overlap any of the other buttons. So the reason we opened this up was to change the default colors to custom colors that we specified in the After Effects project. If you don't remember exactly what those color values are, it's a good idea to have After Effects open in the background so you can reference them. Let's start with our text for our buttons. So in each of the layer groups, you can see that there is a text layer. You can simply select that text layer. Then you can go into the character panel and change the color of that text to your custom color. I'm just going to pull up our After Effects project to reference that. And the button colors were this exact value here. And I'll just paste that right here. We can also have that be our foreground color. So I'll just paste that here as well. And then if you'd like, you can select multiple text layers and apply that color to all of them. Some of our pop-up menus use the color overlay effect to apply color to the text. In that situation, you would simply double-click on the layer to bring up the layer style, and under the color overlay, you can just change the value to that of your custom color. If you have other graphic elements in your button groups that are not inside of a smart object, you can simply change the colors of those as well by double-clicking on them and changing the color overlay. Many of the background objects will be placed into smart object layers. So to open those up, you just double-click on them. In this case, we want to change the color of the rows to our custom red color. So let's find that color layer here. And we want to go grab our custom color that we applied to it from our After Effects project. Under our rose color, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to set that as our foreground color. And then using the paint bucket tool, and with that layer selected, I'll just go ahead and fill that in. With our white wedding template, we've provided some curve adjustments so you can more closely match the After Effects color. So you just double click on that to bring it up. And we'll just adjust those colors a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good. And to commit those changes, you just simply close the smart object and press yes to save. And then you want to save your pop-up menu, File, Save. And now you can just close that and minimize Photoshop. The next step in the authoring process is to configure the menu buttons. So let's bring up our main menu. We're going to start with our button highlights. So if we click this little icon here to show the selected subpicture highlight, that should display the buttons. However, with this particular menu, our button highlights by default are white and the background is white as well, which makes them very difficult to see. So let's change these button highlights from their default color to the colors that we provide with the kit. So with our menu selected, we'll go to Menu, Edit Menu Color Set. What we want to do now is import our custom color set file. So this icon right here will import, and then located in your kit is the Authoring Templates folder, into the Encore Menu Templates folder. And in that folder, you will notice there is a color set file for your particular menu, and then you can go ahead and open. And as you can see here, we have some different colors for different button states and different color groups. The normal group is for when the button is not selected or highlighted. We have used highlight group 1 for all of the normal buttons on a menu, and we use highlight group 2 for the scene selection boxes. So if you want, you can go ahead and preview what that looks like. Just check off the preview and move it to the side so you can see your menu in the background. So when your button is highlighted, it will look black like that, and then when you click on it to activate it, it will change to that color, which is the default color, but we want to change it to our custom color from our menu. Let's just bring up our After Effects project in the background. All right, our button colors are this color right here. We just click on it to get the color value and copy it and paste it into the value of these buttons here. And for highlight group 2, we want to do the same thing. Paste it here. And we just pasted all those values into each one of those colors. And now we can click OK. Okay, if we go into the Basic tab of the Properties panel, we can see that that menu now has the Menu 07 color set applied to it. However, the other menus still have the old one, so let's go ahead and select all those other menus at the same time and change their color set to our one that we've imported. Now is also a good time to turn off the automatically route buttons for all of the menus. Just go ahead and select all of them and uncheck automatically route buttons. And the reason we turn off automatically route buttons is that Encore doesn't do a very good job of routing the buttons. So we're going to show you how to configure those manually a little bit later. And while we're still setting up the colors of the buttons, let's go into the scene menus and change those scene selection boxes to highlight group 2. So we'll go into our menus tab and select the scene menu and select all of the chapters that are visible in your menu. Now we're going to change the highlight to group 2. Let's bring that up so we can see what it looks like. Now you may also need to make sure that the regular buttons for that menu are set to highlight group 1. If you'll be having Encore fill in those scene selection boxes, as well as filling in the chapter titles for each of those, you want to make sure that you check Set Name from Link. And this will simply replace the default text with the name of the chapter once that chapter has been linked up to that button. Again, that is only if you'll be having Encore fill in those boxes. If you have already rendered those scene selection titles into the After Effects project, you do not need to set that. And one more thing you need to do if you'll be having Encore place the content into those boxes is to select the other buttons, the main menu button, the next button, and the previous button, and uncheck Sync Button Text and Name. Now I'm sure you've been noticing these kind of jumbled chapter titles here under the scene selection boxes, and you've been wondering why it's like that. Well, if you recall from the After Effects tutorial, there are two methods for creating the scene selection menu. One method is to fill in the scene selection boxes within After Effects, allowing you to see the content during the transitions. And the other method is to have Encore fill in the chapter boxes, which is typically faster. By default, the scene selection menu that you import into Encore is set up to be used with the second method, which has Encore fill in the chapter boxes. The menu background that we're using in this demonstration has the chapter titles and scene selection box content already placed into it from the After Effects project. You can also see the chapter titles that were part of the menu that we imported, as well as gray boxes for the scene selection content. So if you used After Effects to render the content into the boxes, you will want to delete the chapter titles and those gray boxes that Encore uses to place content into. So you can select your menu, go into your Layers panel, and then we can expand all of our chapter boxes. And what we want to do is select the text layer and the Dropbox layer for each of the scene selection boxes. And we can go ahead and delete those. As you can see, this has revealed the scene box content and chapter titles that was rendered into the After Effects project. We also need to do the same thing for a second page if you have one. So I'm going to select the menu and expand all of the scene box layers. Select the Dropbox and the text layer for each of those, and simply press delete. Also, our last page does not need a next button, so we can delete that. And our first page does not need a back button. We can select that and delete. Now for this particular menu, the next button is part of the Encore menu and not rendered into the After Effects background. So if you have customized your colors, you will need to update the color of that button within Encore. So to do that, simply locate the text layer of the next button, and then in the character panel, you can change the color of that button to that of your custom color. And if you have a back button that you need to do that for as well, go ahead and do that. Also go ahead and do that for the other scene selection menus that you have. Select the back button that needs to be changed and update the color. For those of you that will be having Encore fill in the scene selection boxes, we will demonstrate how to do that in just a little bit. But first, let's go through all our menus and remove any unnecessary button highlights or reposition them or add additional ones if we need to. So let's start with our main menu. If you have changed the name of any of your buttons on your menu and you need to reposition the button highlight, you can do that by first selecting the menu so you can reveal the layers, and then using the Move tool, you can select the highlight of the button you want to reposition. And now you can zoom in by pressing Z on the keyboard and clicking to zoom in. And now you can click and drag the button highlight anywhere you want. To undo any movements you don't want to make, you simply press Ctrl Z or Command Z. If you have added additional buttons in your After Effects project, and now you need additional button highlights for those buttons, you can easily duplicate existing button highlights by selecting the entire button in the Layers panel, and then holding down Alt if you're on a PC, or Option if you're on a Mac, and click and drag, and that will duplicate your button highlight. After duplicating a button, you will also want to rename it. So in the Properties panel, just go ahead and rename that button to whatever you want. But since I don't need any additional buttons for this demonstration, I'm just going to delete that. And now we can zoom out. Let's move on to our pop-up menu. If you have decided not to use one of these submenus and you still want to use the Blu-ray pop-up menu, you can remove the additional button by following these steps. So if we want to remove the bonus features button, we will locate that in our pop-up menu layers panel. We can start by deleting the text and the highlight for that additional button. And then we would simply drag the background element for that button into the button right next to it. However, you cannot do that within Encore, so you need to edit the menu in Photoshop. Just simply select the menu, edit menu in Photoshop. And once in Photoshop, you can drag that background element into the button right next to it. And then you could just delete that special features button. But I'm not going to do that right now, so I will just undo that. We've already set up our scene selection menus, so now let's move on to our special features menu. If we reveal the button highlights for the menu, you will see that by default it has included highlights for additional buttons on the menu. In this example, we have only used 2 items on the special features menu, so we can delete the button highlights for the other ones. We'll select buttons 3 through 6 and press delete. For those of you that will be having Encore fill in your scene selection boxes, let's go ahead and demonstrate what that will look like. So I'm going to import a new menu into our project. We'll just select the scene selection menu again and open. I'll go ahead and select that menu and I will assign the background. Now, as you can see, this menu background was rendered with the intent of having Encore place the content into the boxes as well as the chapter titles. So if we reveal the layers panel and we can turn off the Dropbox layer, you will see that there is just black rendered into the box, and it will let Encore fill in that box. So let's just quickly prepare this menu like we did with our others. We'll select it in the Menus tab, and we'll select the scene box layers and change their highlight to highlight group 2, and just confirm that the other layers are set to highlight group 1. We also want to make sure that the color set is set to our imported one and that the buttons are not automatically routed. And remember, since Encore will be filling in these boxes for us, we want to make sure that the set name from link is checked off for those scene selection boxes. And for the other buttons, we want to uncheck sync button text and name. We can also update the colors of the back and next button. So I will select those and change the color. And the same for the other one as well. Now we're about to demonstrate the chapter index feature of Encore. What this will do is automatically fill in all the chapter boxes for you and create as many additional pages as are necessary so that each chapter of your timeline gets placed into a box. It will also remove the back button from your first page and the next button from your last page, as well as link up those buttons to each separate page of your scene selections. If there's anything that's going to be configured the same for each page of those scene selections, you want to do it now before you create the chapter index so that you do not have to do it on each page of the scene selections. In our case, the main menu button is always going to be linking back to the main menu and will always have the same transition. So what we want to do is set the link for that button by selecting the button highlight, and then in the properties, we can set the link for that button. We have to go to specify link, and then we will select the main menu, and we want it to go back to the scene selection button on the main menu. We also want it to return to the loop point of that menu and not the very beginning of the intro sequence. And then click OK. We also need to set a transition from this menu back to the main menu. So let's reveal our assets. And then with that button highlight selected, go into the Transition tab under the Properties and set the transition to the Scene Selection menu to the main menu. With that transition configured, you are now ready to create your chapter index. And remember, the chapter index is only used if you'll be having Encore place the content into your scene selection boxes. So let's open up our timeline that we will be creating the chapter index for. So I'll go down to our video folder and open up the timeline of our feature. And now let's bring up our scene menu again. And all you have to do is drag the first chapter of your timeline into the first chapter box. You will notice that it fills in that first box with the poster frame of that chapter. And remember, if you want your scene menu created by Encore to play video instead of display still images, you need to enable animate buttons in the motion tab of the properties panel for the menu. So with that first chapter placed into the first box, you then go up to the top under Menu, Create Chapter Index. As you can see, Encore has removed the back button from the first page. It also created an additional page for the remaining chapters of that timeline. So if we just click on that to open it up, you will see that it's automatically renamed the chapter titles to chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8, and remove the next button from that page. Now the scene selection menus last for a duration of 30 seconds. And if you have animate buttons enabled, it will play the first 30 seconds starting at the poster frame for that chapter. If you would like to have a particular scene selection box start at a different point in the video, or if you are using still images and you want to have a different still image displayed in the box, you need to change the poster frame for that particular chapter. So for example, we will select chapter 5 in our timeline. And currently the poster frame is set to the exact same time as the chapter point. If you'd like to set a different time, let's bring up our monitor here. You can locate a different frame you would like for that particular chapter, and then you simply right-click and set poster frame. And now if we return to our scene menu, you can see that that frame has been updated for that particular chapter. And if you have animate buttons checked, then the video will start playing from that point. And another note, the poster frame can be anywhere in the entire timeline and does not have to be contained within that particular chapter. And again, you only need to do this if you'll be having Encore fill in the chapter boxes for you. For those of you that have rendered the content into the boxes using After Effects, you can manually drag the chapters into the boxes. So let's bring that up as an example. We can drag our first chapter into the first box and just do the same for the other boxes. And we'll just finish off our second page. Now, I personally like to see the content in the boxes during the transitions, so I will utilize the After Effects scene selection box drop zones, and I'll typically only use one page of scene selection. However, I may have 10 or 12 or even more chapters in the timeline. So what I'll do is I'll link to just the important chapters in the video. So I may have this be for chapter 1, and this be for chapter 5, this one for chapter 8. And that way you don't have to have a box for every single chapter in your video. You may just have one for the important ones. For example, as you can see here, we have a chapter for speeches or toasts, and there may be 3 or 4 speeches that are separated by chapter points, and you only need to link to the first one, and then the next scene selection box will be for the segment after that. So hopefully that makes sense. Now that you've created your scene selection menus, you are now ready for the next step of linking up all the menus, buttons, and timelines. I'll start by bringing up the main menu. Let's reveal our buttons. We will start with our Play Movie button here. In the Basic tab under the Properties panel, set the link for that button to that of your main feature. And you also want to set the transition for that button. So with the button selected, in the Transition tab, you will set the transition asset to that of the transition main to video. And we can go back into our Basic tab. Select your next button, which should be the Scene Selection menu. We're going to set that to our first page of scene selections. So under the link, set that to our Scene Selection menu, default. We can also set the transition as well from the main menu to scenes. And moving on to our next button, go ahead and select it and set the link to that of your Special Features menu. And don't forget the transition from the main menu to the Special Features menu. If you're authoring a Blu-ray disc with CS4 or above, you want to configure the buttons of your pop-up menu. Let's go ahead and set the link of our main menu button. When returning to the loop point of a menu, you always need to specify the link. And we want that to return to the main menu, selecting the play feature and set it to the loop point. Okay. Now for the scene selection menu, go ahead and set that link. And the bonus features menu. If you have used the chapter index feature, your button links should already be set up for those scene menus. If you do not use the chapter index feature, you need to configure your menu buttons now. So open up the first scene menu. All of these scene selection boxes should already be linked to their chapters. So let's go ahead and set the link for our main menu button. Go ahead to specify a link. We want that to return to the main menu and highlighting the scene selection button and set it to the loop point of that menu. We also need to set the transition for that. And that'll be transitioning from the first of the scene selection menu pages to the main menu. And now our next button will be going to page 2 of our scene selections. So we'll just set that link to scene menu 2. And now let's set up our scene menu 2. We'll do the same for our main menu button. First, we will set the link of the button to return to the main menu, selecting the scene selection button, set to the loop point, OK. And since the content of these boxes will be seen in the transitions, we need to set the transition for this button to go from our scene page 2 to the main menu. Let's also set the link for the back button, which will return you to the first page. If you use the Encore chapter index feature, you just want to confirm that it properly set your back and next buttons. I'll just open that up, select the next button, and confirm that it does go to your page 2, and then bring up your page 2, confirm that it properly goes back to your page 1, and also make sure that your main menu buttons are still configured correctly. Now let's go ahead and set the links of our special features menu. Our first button here is going to link to a same-day edit video. And our second button is going to link to an additional video. You also want to set the link of the main menu button. Just like we did before, go to specify link, select the main menu. And since it's coming from the special features menu, we want to go back to highlighting the special feature button and set it to the loop point. OK. And don't forget, you also need to set the transition for that button. So go to the Transition tab, and we will link that to our Transition special menu to the main menu. Now you may also want to rename these buttons from their default. So if you select the button highlight next to that button and in the Basic tab, You can change the name of that button from button 1 to whatever you have, and do the same for the other button. The next step is to set the end action of your timelines so that the disk knows where to go after they are done playing through. So let's bring up our timelines panel. And what you can do is select all of your timelines and have the end action be set to return to last menu. That way your special features videos will return to the special features menu once they are done playing, and your main feature will return to whatever menu you started playing it from, either the main menu or one of the scene selection menus. Also, this is an important step for those of you who are authoring a Blu-ray disc and using a pop-up menu. You need to specify the pop-up menu for each one of the timelines. Simply importing a pop-up menu into your project does not mean it'll be placed on the disk. You need to set that pop-up menu for each of your timelines. So with all of your timelines selected into the Properties panel, go ahead and set the pop-up menu to that of the one that you imported. We're almost done. There's just a few more steps we need to do. The next step is to configure the custom button routing. Let's start with our main menu. What you want to do next is click this icon right here to show the button routing. And now you can see the different ways that the buttons will navigate when using the arrows on the remote. Let's just use our first button as an example. So when you press the up arrow, it'll simply stay at button 1. Same when you press the down button. If you press right while you're on button 1, it'll go to button 2. If you press left while you're on button 1, it'll jump to button 3. If you'd like the button 1 to do nothing when you press left instead of go to button 3, you'd simply click on the left area and drag out to nowhere and release, and that'll set it to nothing, which is basically the same thing as setting it to itself. You can do the same thing for the button on the far right. You can just click and drag out so that it does nothing when you press right. And now we can go through the rest of the menus, manually setting the button navigation. So let's open up our pop-up menu if you are authoring a Blu-ray disc. Reveal the button routing. And as you can see, the way that Encore automatically routed the buttons is not ideal. So we can just go ahead and fix these. And then our scenes menu. You probably want the back button on your first scene selection box to go to the main menu button. And you probably want your upper right box to go to your lower left box when you press right. And the opposite for the lower left button. I'm just going to go ahead and fix some of these. Moving on to our next menu. I'll just skip over those other scene selection menus that were used for the chapter index demonstration. Let's bring up our special features menu. You might want your uppermost scene selection item to go to the main menu when you press up, main menu button that is. And let's just fix some of these other button routings. All right, that looks pretty good. After you have finished manually setting your button routing, you are now ready for the next step, which just involves configuring some final settings and building your disk. So let's configure our disk settings by going into the Build tab and just make sure the disk properties are visible over here. I'm going to rename our disk to Sample Project. And make sure your disk name is not too long and doesn't contain any spaces or unusual characters, as that may lead to problems during the build process. Your first play should already be set from when you first imported your menus. Now your DVD or Blu-ray remote should have a title button or a top menu button, and this is where you specify that menu. This should be set to your main menu, and if it's not, go ahead and specify that. You also need to specify the main timeline of your disk, and this is the timeline that will play if you press the play button on the remote while you are on a menu. And next, if you will be letting Encore transcode your main video, you can now go and specify those transcode settings for that asset. Also remember to periodically save your project. Go to File, Save. Just in case it crashes, you don't have to go back and redo a lot of your project. So back to those transcode settings. Let's bring up our videos. We can close out of this as well. And I'm going to expand the project panel. Go ahead and select the video asset that you need to set your transcode settings for. You can also select multiple assets at a time. Right click and go to transcode settings. Here you can specify all the settings for that asset. Maximum render quality should only be used if you will be scaling your video from HD to SD or SD to HD. Otherwise, make sure you leave that unchecked. Also, frame blending should only be used if you will be encoding to a different frame rate than your source. I don't recommend doing that anyways, so that should always be unchecked. There are also additional settings in the edit quality presets that you can play around with. And once you set those for your asset, go ahead and select OK. You can also see the transcode status of your assets for both DVD and Blu-ray. Our AC3 file has already been prepared and is compatible with both DVD and Blu-ray, so it does not need to transcode that asset. And our H.264 high definition video has already been transcoded for Blu-ray, so it says don't transcode. However, it has not been transcoded for DVD, so it says untranscoded here. If your transcode settings are set to automatic, it will automatically maximize the bitrate to fit on the disk without exceeding the maximum bitrate allowed by the format. And as I mentioned before, I found that Encore goes much smoother and it's much easier to diagnose problems if you've transcoded your assets before you bring them into Encore. So if you can, and if you're familiar with it, go ahead and use Adobe Premiere or the Adobe Media Encoder to encode those assets before you import them. All right, let's go into the build panel and finish this off. Let me expand this. Go ahead and set the format to the type that you will be creating, either DVD, Blu-ray, or Flash. In this demonstration, I'll just be creating a Blu-ray. As for the output, set it to disk if you'll be burning a disk directly from Encore, and set it to image if you'll be using Encore or some third-party program to burn the image file to a disk. I prefer to use a different program to burn the actual project to a disk, so I'm going to just create a Blu-ray image or DVD image. Encore just isn't that great of a program for burning the actual disk, as it lacks a lot of the options of other burning software. You then need to create a location for that image file. I'll just go ahead and click Browse. I want to create a new folder inside of our sample project working folder, and we'll call it Image. And then in that folder, I'm going to create an ISO file. I'll just call it the same name as the disk, sample project.iso. Save. You should also specify your disk info, such as the size of the disk and the image type. If you'll be burning directly to your disk in Encore, then you need to specify the recorder and the write speed for the disk. Before you build, you can go ahead and check your project for errors. Just go ahead and click the Check Project button. and then just click on Start. And this will let you know if you forgot to set the links for any of the buttons and if you have any orphan menus. And an orphan menu is one that nothing ever links to, so there's no way to access it on the disk. For example, if your pop-up menu is an orphan menu, it means you did not set your timelines to access that pop-up menu. Also, if one of your submenus is an orphan menu, it just means you forgot to link to it from the main menu. Once you fix any potential problems that you might have, you can just go ahead and close that, and you are now ready to build. And after your build has hopefully finished successfully, you should go ahead and save your project to retain transcoded assets. If you are using a PC, you can use the free program Image Burn to burn that image file to a disk. It's a great program with a small footprint, and it's very easy to just load your image file and select the speed and the number of copies that you need. There are also some additional advanced settings if you want to change the book type, if you are familiar with that. If you are on a Mac, you can use Toast to burn the image file to a disk. Sometimes Encore can freeze or have issues while burning to a disk, whereas a different program, such as the ones that I mentioned, would not have those issues while burning your project to a disk. So I highly recommend those programs that I mentioned to burn your project to a disk instead of Encore if you encounter problems. Also, with an image file, you have an easy backup of your project that you can create multiple copies from, and you do not have to back up your entire Encore project. You can simply back up just the image file if you know you won't have to make any changes to the project. For those of you who will be authoring both a DVD and a Blu-ray, we strongly advise you to create separate projects for each format, as Encore does a very poor job of downscaling menus and button highlights. And if you take a look at the very bottom of our Encore Quick Reference Guide, we provide you with some additional tips so you can avoid running into problems. Alright, this concludes the main part of our Encore tutorial. If and only if you are using Encore CS3, you should stick around because we will be going over the differences with that workflow. For those of you who are authoring with Encore CS4 or above, you can proceed to the next tutorial. So here we are in Encore CS3. Let's go ahead and start a new project. I'm going to name this Sample Project CS3. I'm also going to be creating a Blu-ray for this quick demonstration. Set the dimensions to full 1920 by 1080. Make sure the codec is set to MPEG-2 and the frame rate to 2997. The other settings can be found in the Advanced tab. You set the bitrate to 20 megabits per second, and then you are done. You can click OK. So one of the big differences with Encore CS3 is that it does not support Blu-ray pop-up menus. So when importing your menus, right-click Import as Menu. You will not select the pop-up menu if you're creating a Blu-ray disc. Also, Encore CS3 has no way of returning to the loop point of the main menu from the submenus, which basically makes the loop point feature useless for us, as we do not want to return to the beginning of the intro sequence every time we go back to the main menu. This is why CS3 users have a separate intro sequence asset than the main menu. Let's just import those assets. We'll create a new folder for the menu assets. Import as asset. Go into your menu exports folder. So you will have a separate intro MOV and a main menu MOV, as well as your scene menu, special features menu, and all of your transitions. So when using Encore CS3, you don't want your main menu to be the first play, as this will skip over your intro sequence. You want your intro to be the first play. However, this must first be placed into a timeline to do that. So just right click on the asset and go to New Timeline. And now that that intro sequence has been set as a timeline, you can select it, right click, and set as first play. And don't worry if it looks like both of these assets are set as first play. It's just a bug with the software. If you just collapse that and expand it, you can see that the first play icon is no longer there. So now that that intro sequence is set as the first play, you want it to go to the main menu after it completes. So with that intro timeline selected, go ahead and set its end action to your main menu. Also, the main menu buttons on your submenus can just link directly back to the main menu. Also remember, when you set the end actions of all your main timelines, you don't accidentally set the end action of your intro sequence to return to the last menu. The end action of the intro sequence must go to the main menu. All right, that's it. Those are the only differences with the workflow if you are using Encore CS3. You are now ready to proceed to the next tutorial, which will go over the packaging templates.